Welcome back to Consider This. Melissa and Sharad here with you tonight. Now, all eyes will be on Kimanis tomorrow as its constituents cast their vote for whom they think should represent them in Parliament. So the Kimanis by-election will witness a one-on-one contest between Parti Warisan Sabah candidate Datuk Karim Bujang and Barisan Nasional candidate Muhammad Alamin. So we have joining us on the line Dr. Vilashini Somiah with the Gender Studies program at Universiti Malaya. Vila, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, you're there in Kimanis to observe the elections. So tell us your observations of the sentiment on the ground right now.
Well, first of all, guys, thanks so much for being so patient and having me, a disembodied voice from afar. I'm really speaking to you from a very, very wet, raining Kimanis currently. And I think the rain has certainly done something to really kind of change the energy around here currently. It's very interesting sort of driving into Kimanis and meeting the people on the ground, certainly, simply because at this point, the big question is who's going to win. And it's really down to the wire. I think it's anybody's game at this moment.
Well, that's fascinating because some pollsters are suggesting that this is a sure win for Warisan.
Right.
Tell us why you think that, that the positions might be quite divided, that in fact it's hard to call at this point.
Well, I think it's looking at two very important issues here. Number one, and the most obvious one, is that there is this incredibly aggressive anti-PSS or Pas Sementara Sabah, or in English it would be loosely translated to the Sabah Temporary Pass, where it certainly brings out this sentiment, this stranger danger, anti-irregular migrant sort of sentiments coming up into the fold. And this, of course, has been around in Sabah for decades, right? I mean, it's always the belief that the indigenous folks will lose out and have lost out to irregular migrants generally. So this is certainly one of the first issues as to why it is that it's a little bit 50-50 in that sense, simply because I think Barisan Nasional is incredibly aggressive with that narrative. They have been pushing it non-stop. If you're on the ground and essentially listening to areas in which Barisan Nasional Barisan Nasional party members have gone in and had conversations with the locals, is that if you give a vote to Warisan, you are essentially losing your rights in this particular area. And I think while it may not be seen as it can come across a bit ludicrous occasionally. There are members of the Kimanis community who have essentially bought into that. That is a real legitimate fear. Right. And the second issue, I think this goes across the board, is that it's bread and butter issues. Can people in Kimanis essentially live up to these kind of living standards that people say in Kota Kinabalu? I mean, let's not use Kuala Lumpur as an example, but somewhere 2 hours away, Kota Kinabalu, can you live up to those standards? So I think it really boils down to that. And Barisan Nasional has been very aggressive with that narrative.
Villa, there's also this question of what Warisan stands for. And if we cast our mind back to the last general elections, Warisan won on a very kind of Sabah-based rights, identity type of platform. What's happened to that? Why weren't they able to counter the narrative that they would be less than willing to protect the interests of Sabahans? And somehow allow for the PSS to be a route to citizenship. I mean, what exactly did not work for Warisan over this campaign period to stake their claim as protectors of Sabahan rights?
I'm going to be really frank here and say that Warisan has been really trying to play an inclusive card. They've been trying to come in and say, inclusivity for all Sabahans, right? And essentially they won on that emotional plea in GE14, is that Sabah has lost autonomy. We essentially cannot decide things for ourselves, be it the economy, be it politically. Our migration is a hack. So essentially, Warisan was able to win pretty much on that ticket. But what a lot of people tend to forget is that while they may have won the state, Barisan Nasional as a party in Sabah essentially didn't actually lose. they had a lot of political froggers, as we call it, right? Guys who are essentially jumping over. So in that sense, Kimanis is still sort of resonating with this old glory of having voted for the previous candidate, Anifa Aman, in the past, and with quite a lot of strength as well. So coming into this, it's really about the kind of old tradition of voting for Barisan Nasional on one hand, and on the other hand, it's a reminder by the Barisan Nasional to those who may have voted for Barisan that they haven't done as good a job as they have gloated to have done. They've been sort of tooting their own horns, and they can't really do that much better from Barisan Nasional.
Right.
So essentially, this is anyone's game at this moment, and you have to remember that you have a lot to lose. And I think that says a lot to the people locally, essentially. It's not how much you have to gain.
Right. Vila, I have a question. So I understand that Datuk Sri Najib Razak is there on the ground campaigning as well. And I'm wondering what the general reception is when it comes to peninsula-based politicians like Najib in this by-election.
Well, of course, with the people that we've spoken to with Najib's arrival, Najib is not the only Peninsular Malaysian who's actually around. I believe Azmin is also around at this moment. So there are sort of visits from ministers coming in from Kuala Lumpur to actually participate. Oddly enough, Malu Apa Bosku has seemed to be making quite a large amount of rounds actually in their local posters, and essentially the word has been revived quite greatly on the ground here in Kimanis. In speaking to locals about how they felt about it and whatnot, some would just sort of say, well, the word originated from here. But I think one thing that has been repeated over and over again locally is that how the elections in Kimanis essentially differs from that of the Peninsula of Malaysia is that, race is not played up as much here, right? And I think you can't really do that in an area where Bumi Putraness is sort of grey in that sense. While you may be a Muslim Bumi Putra, you cannot be mistaken immediately for just being Malay, right? I think people are very clear and very loyal and very proud of their respective heritages here. So essentially, it's not really a game about race as it's so commonly used in the peninsula. It's actually really about indigeneity, and it's really about belonging, right? If you're an indigenous person to this area and you belong to this area, you therefore should have the right to so many other things. Do I have the right to decide whether or not I'm going to be at threat from, again, stranger danger? Do I have the right and the ability to live a life in which, it's more comfortable, and so on and so forth? So I think it really boils down to that at the moment.
Vila, what do you think the media might have missed in their reports about Kimanis?
I think the issue here is that if the anti-PSS issue has been played up so greatly, we tend to forget that when we talk about Sabah, it's always about indigenous persons or communities missing out. They've always been a forgotten bunch of people. And then there's this issue with irregular migrants and the kind of influx of almost, say, anywhere between 1 to 2 million people, is that they're not two separate conversations. They're really on the same spectrum here, right? And one issue impacts the other. If there are a group of people who will vote for Barisan Nasional tomorrow on the line that they do not want the PSS to be passed, then it says something about indigeneity and the lack of belonging than it does about the strength of Barisan Nasional. Regardless who wins tomorrow, it's going to be a momentous win. It's going to tell us a lot about essentially where it is Sabah stands in the larger scheme of Malaysian politics. It will tell us essentially about how it is that the local electorates are voting, and essentially the kind of misunderstood and forgotten and willfully ignored needs of the local people. Because essentially what Sabahans need are, on top of autonomy, and even then, by then, those definitions are still incredibly grey, incredibly loose, is that they don't feel empowered. And if they don't feel empowered, a subject like the anti-PSS is going to scream volumes at them. And, it's going to be political fodder whoever uses it.
All right. Well, Vila, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us this evening. Really appreciate your time and calling in from Kimanis there. That was Dr. Vilashini Somiah with Universiti Malaya. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on Consider This for this episode. I'm Melissa Idris, with me Sharad Kutan, signing off, wishing you a happy weekend. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for watching and good night.